Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Welcome to Bloomberg UK Politics, your bite-sized guide to the corridors of power. I'm Yuan.
And I'm Caroline Hepker. So Keir Starmer has set out his 6 priorities for a new Labour government. In a direct pitch to voters today, the Labour leader's been in Essex, laying out what he calls his first steps for change.
I have ambition for this country. And like all ambition, that starts with first steps. First steps towards higher growth, an NHS back on its feet, secure borders, cheaper bills, safer streets, and opportunities for your children. Because we have all had enough, the whole country's had enough of 14 years of failure. Spinning round and round and round, going in circles.
So Keir Starmer is, of course, trying to become the first Labour leader to win a general election since Tony Blair. And so inevitably there are comparisons being drawn between his pitch and Tony Blair's 1997 pledge card.
Yeah, it's all very measured stuff. There's a monochrome picture of Keir Starmer looking serious, sleeves rolled up, ready for action. The first promise is to deliver economic stability with tough spending rules and a pledge to keep taxes, inflation and mortgages as low as possible. But I guess the question is whether promising to steady the ship will be enough or whether voters want more radical change.
Yeah, interesting to consider the political positioning, of course, of these 6 pledges. Now, they build on the 5 missions that Starmer has previously laid out, with the addition of a 6th on immigration. This is a pledge to launch a new border security command to tackle criminal boat gangs, perhaps an attempt to take on the Conservative taunts that Labour's got no plan on immigration.
Yeah, Labour's going big on this campaign. It's their biggest offline media spend since Keir Starmer became leader, with newspaper adverts, billboards and ad vans. So they clearly want people to see this and they want it to cut through. We're going to get some analysis of it as a piece of political marketing a little bit later on in the show.
So let's dig into some of the detail then with Bloomberg Associate Editor Ailbhe Ray. Really good to have you on the programme, Ailbhe. Just give us a summary then of what is on this pledge card or these statements, what we've heard at Keir Starmer's launch event.
Yes, so there are 6 pledges, as you say. 5 are kind of based on the missions that Keir Starmer has spent basically the past year and a bit outlining. And then, as you say, there's a 6th new one on illegal immigration, which they announced last week, but they have now added to their sort of 6 priorities. So to just run through them briefly, first one, deliver economic stability. Number 2, cut NHS waiting times. Number 3, launch a new border security command. That's their project to tackle small boats crossing the channel. 4, set up Great British Energy, which is a publicly owned clean power company. 5, crack down on antisocial behaviour. And number 6, recruit 6,500 new teachers.
Ailbhe, what did you make of this as a piece of kind of political theatre? I mean, all the great and the good were there from the Labour Party, weren't they? It was clearly intended to be a big event. What were your takeaways from that?
They have put a huge amount of energy into this. It was quite extensively briefed beforehand. Labour officials are sort of calling it their campaign launch, even though you would expect that they will have another manifesto launch / campaign launch during the short campaign once an election actually has been called by Rishi Sunak. But I think that they see these 6 pledges as, without calling them their first steps rather than pledges, they see this as their core offer to voters. So this is their kind of key campaigning tool, a bit like what Tony Blair did in 1997, having his pledge cards with 5 pledges. These are basically the 6 brief messages that they want to emphasise to voters. I think it's interesting to see what's on that and what isn't on that, which we might talk about in a bit more detail. I think that they're hoping that it's just a way of actually just hammering through some of the key messages that they've had for a while, because of course there's actually no new policy in any of this. It's just unveiling a big campaigning tool and a big ad campaign.
Ailbhe, I'm afraid to say I remember the little pledge card that Tony Blair and New Labour, as it was then, actually had. And it, even though it was really simple, it was actually quite revolutionary at the time. What do you make? Because it was so simply put, and there was cut through at a time of a lot of political noise, even back then. So that's why there's that comparison. How do you see that comparison to the 97 moment?
This is a comparison that Keir Starmer's team are inviting themselves. And I think it's fair to say that within a lot of the Labour movement, there's a sense in a way that the Tony Blair campaign in 97 is a bit mythologized because he was the last Labour leader to actually win an election, and it was quite a long time ago. So I think there's a sense that basically whatever Tony Blair did must have been part of the recipe for success. The last time they won, there was a pledge card, so they need one. But of course, other leaders have made big key pledges. You might remember the ill-fated Ed Stone from
Yes.
Ed Miliband
Yes.
in 2015. It's not as though Labour hasn't done this in the more recent past, but the comparison they're inviting is with Tony Blair. And I think it's sort of worth noting that one of the key people behind this is a man called Pat McFadden, who's in the shadow cabinet. He's not really a household name. He is the head of the campaign, and he was also in that Tony Blair operation in 1997. So he was involved in both, and he'll definitely be taking lessons from it.
Ailbhe, did we get anything new today?
Essentially, no, there's no new policy, but that sort of wasn't the point of it. It's still quite instructive just for all of us to see what Labour will be hammering home and what they won't be in the coming months. I mean, we have talked a bit before on the podcast about some of Labour's really big policy commitments, like on house building, like on sweeping reforms of workers' rights. None of those things are on this pledge card. And now Labour would say that this is not the sum total of their offer. All their other previous policy commitments still stand, but it's interesting to see what they're going to emphasise and what they won't. Another thing worth noting is that their number one first step is deliver economic stability. And that's a slightly different message to what we've heard from Labour over the past year and a bit, which is prioritising economic growth. You might remember they pledged last year to deliver the highest growth in the G7. Again, they're saying that they're not moving off that pledge, but actually the language now is quite different. They're just promising stability. It's a more restrained offer.
Okay, Ailbhe, thank you so much for being with us and for your analysis, Bloomberg Associate Editor Ailbhe Rea.
So campaign launches are generally policy driven, but they're also an exercise in political marketing. Well, joining us to evaluate Keir Starmer's performance through that lens is political marketing expert Benedict Pringle, author of the book Primed: 5 Election Narratives to Win Your Party's Nomination. Benedict, thanks for joining us on the show. You've worked on a number of political campaigns. How does Keir Starmer's latest effort measure up, do you reckon?
It's a good campaign. It's the right message at the right moment for the right audience. Let's start with the audience. They're clearly going after undecided voters who very likely voted Conservative at the last election. It's the right moment because I think amongst those that group of people, there's still a feeling of there's lack of clarity about what a Labour government might do, or they might not be convinced that Labour are ready to govern. And then this message is designed to speak to that audience and that mindset. And the message is all about delivery and competence. And, that this group of voters aren't looking for, a crazy new diagnosis or big new ideas about how to solve them. What they're after is competent delivery. And that's what this campaign focuses on.
I mean, that's perhaps, isn't it, because some of the issues are quite deeply entrenched, and they're very large on economic growth and, the health service, defence and investment in education. Do you think that there are the hallmarks of a successful campaign here? Because the other thing that Keir Starmer seems to be trying to do is not just get the votes or the polling support of people who are disenchanted with the Conservatives, but actually that people will come out and vote positively for Labour. Do you see the hallmarks of a successful campaign?
I do see the hallmarks of a successful campaign. Every election since 1979, if a party is ahead on leadership and they're ahead on will manage the economy, they tend to emerge as the largest party. And so what you see in this campaign is Starmer front and center of the adverts, and that's because they think they can win on leadership between Starmer and Sunak. And step one of the 6 steps is focused on the economy. So clearly they're focusing on leadership and economy, and we know that that's what wins general elections.
And it's all quite modest, isn't it? I noticed there's no references to money whatsoever. There's no kind of big spending pledges. We're going to chuck billions at this, chuck billions at that. Is that a case of people are just a bit cynical about politicians and their spending pledges, or is it just an attempt by Labour to steady as she goes, not to make any dangerous promises?
Well, you'll remember that Labour had to U-turn on the 28 billion that they promised for green investment, and I think what they learned from that was sticking a big sort of investment number is a risky thing to do, and actually it doesn't mean anything. And they are better focused on the impact of any investment that any investment might make. So you can see in this advert that they focus on the number of teachers that they are promising to deliver, or the number of new hospital appointments. And so they're not talking about the amount of money they're going to invest in, probably because there is unlikely to be much new money going around, but also because they've been stung before about talking about money rather than outcomes.
How much do you think this campaign is going to revolve around Keir Starmer himself, around his personality? The debate about how steely and charismatic versus boring he may be, whatever lens you choose.
I think they will try and portray Keir Starmer as the person who is best placed to deliver in a pragmatic, sensible way. And I think Keir Starmer is very well placed to do that. He's the son of a toolmaker. He's an experienced public servant, and they will argue that these sort of personal qualities, it means that he's very well placed to make the pragmatic fixes that the country needs. So, he is not blessed with great charisma. And I think if they try and pretend that he is that, it will fall quite flat. I think this picture that they've used, he looks sort of fairly serious, sleeves rolled up, like a man who has a practical challenge in front of him that he needs to take on methodically.
And what do you make of the political positioning of this? Because Labour has to appeal to a lot of people, a lot of different people across the political spectrum. They've got a lot of Conservative voters who voted Tory in 2019 to target, and there are also, of course, traditional Labour voters, some of whom are not happy with the direction of the party.
I mean, one of the things that jumped out at me is, so there are 6 steps in this latest campaign, and you may remember that Labour have previously launched 5 missions. Now, one of those missions, which was mainly focused around house building and infrastructure, is not included in these 6 steps. So that is a mission that's sort of been but not focused on for this particular campaign. And another one of the steps that has been included, which wasn't in the 5 missions, is around border security. And what that says to me is that Labour feel like they've got the sort of renty something audience locked up. They're not going anywhere. They're in the bank for Labour. But what they do need to do is speak to people who probably voted Conservative last time, who are worried about illegal immigration. And so that's why border security is included in the 6 steps, but house building isn't.
Interesting. I mean, to those 2 points, we should mention that Keir Starmer, of course, was introduced onto stage at this event by somebody who said, I voted Conservative all my life, and then went on to say, why he was introducing Keir Starmer and supporting Labour. And there was also a house builder, CEO of a UK house builder, also at this event. So, look, I think it's very interesting on that front. What could go wrong here? This could potentially be a very long campaign. Even though the UK's political campaigns are meant to be short, this could actually last many, many months. It's much more reminiscent of, let's say, a US sort of style length of campaigning. What could go wrong? What are the pitfalls to your mind?
Obviously, it does give time for the Conservatives to try and pick at some of these steps and sort of undermine them or borrow them or take them or whatever. But I think there's a relatively low risk in that, given that these are not new policies that have been announced. And I think they've been sort of made fairly bomb-proof. But that is obviously a risk that they start to unravel or get taken by the opposition Another risk is that the public will see these steps and sort of go, okay, yes, and then a few months later they'll start thinking, oh, what else have you got to offer? And Labour will have to sort of try and come up with something fresh to sort of get people excited with. I think, to be honest, both of those risks are fairly low. My guess is the reason for the timing of this is that there's an opportunity before the sort of summer kicks in where most people inevitably drift away slightly from current affairs to sort of land these steps just before people's focus drifts elsewhere, and then we come back in September, the sort of back to school moment and the party conferences where things will be burning hot and will really be beating the drum going up into the general election. So I mean, I think it is. When I first saw it, I thought, wow, this is a little early to be doing this, but I can see why they've done it.
Benedict, great to get your thoughts on that from the political marketing angle. That's Benedict Pringle, author of Primed, 5 Election Narratives to Win Your Party's Nomination. I think really interesting how, looking at some of the things which are not in this actually, so the house building that that Benedict mentioned there, also the green investment and the workers' rights stuff championed by Angela Rayner. Not to say, of course, all this won't be in the manifesto, I'm sure they will be, but they're not choosing to focus on those in the key pledges. No,
absolutely, but the pledges are in and of themselves absolutely enormous, in terms of really trying to improve the UK economy, improve the health service and education and the sort of social fabric of society as well, because there's a pledge on society. Also, I think those are enormous issues for anybody to tackle, and especially when we don't actually have any figures on spending and how that's going to happen. But look, I think it's a very interesting moment to start thinking about the Labour campaign. A little early, maybe not. Well, that's it from us for today. If you like the programme, don't forget to subscribe, give it 5 stars so that other people can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify or wherever you listen.
This episode was produced by Tiwa Adebayo and audio engineer was Sean Gostamakia. I'm Yuan Potts.
And I'm Caroline Hepker. We'll be back with more tomorrow. This is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg UK Politics. Listen weekdays at noon on DAB Digital Radio in London.